My grandson threw hot water on me. They said, he's just a kid. I left and took the house deed. I made 5 dishes, folded the napkins into fans. And still, no one noticed. I hadn't sat down all night. The oven's soft beep pulled me back to the moment. I grabbed the mitts, lifted the roast chicken with practiced ease, and slid the tray onto the cooling rack. My knees ached from standing since sunrise, but I didn't mention it. The house smelled like cinnamon rosemary and a bit of bleach. I'd scrubbed the counters 3 times to make sure they sparkled before anyone arrived. Liam deserved a clean birthday kitchen. Everyone always said that Daniel once promised me I wouldn't have to cook on Liam's birthdays anymore. That was 5 birthdays ago. Now, he was out in the living room, leaning into the couch cushions, with one eye on his phone and the other vaguely pointed at the cake. "Look here, buddy," someone said. "Smile." I could hear the chorus of iPhone clicks through the kitchen door. I adjusted the pudding cups, vanilla, just the way Liam liked them, and placed them beside the pie. The napkins I had folded into little triangles had begun to wilt from the heat of the room, and I lightly fanned them back up again. The table looked festive from where I stood through the narrow crack in the door. Green and red paper plates, plastic forks in a mason jar, and that cheap birthday banner from Walgreens I reused every year. No one had come in to check on me. I didn't mind. Not really. I liked the kitchen. It was my place. Safe, even if a bit lonely. I stirred the gravy slowly, letting the rhythm calm my hands. They'd started to cramp again, a familiar dull ache that came with too much chopping and not enough rest. Outside, the first flakes of snow drifted past the window, lazy and quiet. Inside, White Christmas played low on the speakers Daniel had installed last fall during one of his rare bursts of domesticity. Sherry's voice rang out too loud and sharp. "Mom, do you have time to whip up that pudding?" Liam asked for it. I replied, with a polite, "Already done," though I doubted she heard me. 10 minutes later, I peeked through the cracked door. Liam was surrounded by wrapping paper and half-eaten cupcakes. He wore his plastic fireman's hat from the dollar store like a crown. Daniel sat behind him, scrolling through something, Reddit maybe, or fantasy football. And when Sherry leaned over to kiss Liam's cheek, Daniel didn't even glance up. There was no chair for me at the table. I noticed it as I adjusted the plates and counted for the 5th time. Daniel, Sherry, Liam, Aunt Jenny, even the neighbor's daughter were squeezed around the table. Every seat was taken. Mine had never been counted. I didn't say anything. I never did. I turned to grab the hot cider pitcher when Liam burst through the kitchen like a spark. He reached past me to the candy bowl. "Not even a thank you?" I asked, gentle but firm. He shrugged, mouth full of marshmallows. "Dad says it's my day." I nodded slowly, though it stung. "Of course, sweetheart." The casserole dish slipped slightly in my hand. I caught it with a sharp breath and set it down with a clatter, which no one noticed. Through the doorway, I saw Daniel lift his head just long enough to say, "Thanks, Mom," before he turned back to his screen. Not even eye contact. The smell of burnt sugar started to rise from the edge of the pie. I turned off the oven, sighing. Sherry popped her head in. "Do you think you could add whipped cream to the pudding?" Liam said. "It's not the same without it." "Sure," I said. Even though we were out of cream, I'd have to mix the powdered kind and hope he wouldn't notice. Back at the sink, I rubbed my hands under lukewarm water, hoping to ease the tightness in my knuckles. They were red and swollen, the skin around my thumbs beginning to crack. I opened the cabinet beneath the sink to grab ointment and paused. A thin envelope peeked out from behind the pipe, Paper yellowed at the edges. I had meant to move it upstairs, but somehow it had stayed there all these years. I closed the cabinet. Later, as the party waned and Liam tore into his final gift, Daniel called Mom. "Take a photo of us." I wiped my hands on a towel and picked up my phone. I framed the shot carefully. Sherry holding Liam's shoulders, Daniel with one arm half around her, all of them smiling. I didn't ask for a photo with them. I never did. Later that night, I scrolled through the photos on my phone and landed on that one. Everyone beaming around the table, the birthday cake mid-slice. I stared at it for a long time, trying to figure out why it didn't sit right. Then I realized I wasn't in the picture. Of course I wasn't. I was the one who took it. I sat back, the ache in my shoulders deepening. My hands throbbed. I walked slowly into the kitchen, removed my apron, and folded it over the chair that wasn't mine. I pressed my palm to my side, where a new pain had started. I stood in the kitchen, quietly slipping off my apron, my arms aching from the day's labor. Outside, the first flakes of snow had begun to fall. The cocoa was meant for Liam. Somehow, it ended up soaking my chest, and no one asked if I was okay. The kettle had just begun its soft whistle. When Liam burst into the kitchen, like a gust of cold air, I was holding a ceramic mug in one hand and a jar of honey in the other, setting up my afternoon tea, a small moment I usually reserved for myself after a long weekend of cleaning and cooking. Outside, the snow had turned to freezing rain, tapping lightly against the kitchen window. The television in the living room was playing that old, stop-motion Rudolph movie, the one with the reindeer. And the elf, who wanted to be a dentist, Grandma, Liam barked, his lower lip pushed out in a practiced pout. Mom said, "I can't have another cookie." He stood with arms folded, still in his fuzzy pajamas, even though it was almost 3 in the afternoon. I tried to keep my voice calm. "You've already had 2, sweetheart. Your tummy might hurt," he scowled. "I don't care. I want one. Now I'm making you a cocoa," I said, stirring the warm milk gently. "Why don't you wait for that?" But the moment he saw the full mug, foamy, chocolatey, topped with little marshmallows, something in him snapped. Maybe it was the sugar crash. Maybe it was the entitlement we never dared name. He stomped forward and yanked the mug out of my hand, too fast, too carelessly. His fingers were small. The mug was heavy. It slipped. The scalding liquid hit my chest like a slap. My breath caught as the heat bit into my skin. I stumbled backward, hitting the cabinet hard. The impact sent a dull thud through my back. But it was the burn that made me suck in a sharp, shaking gasp. I looked down. My shirt was soaked, sticking to me like second skin. The cocoa left a sticky trail down my side, and the mug shattered against the floor with a sharp crack. I didn't scream. I couldn't. My throat clenched too tightly around the pain. Liam froze, then his eyes widened, shimmering with the kind of tears that always arrived. Like a siren's call for help, he began to wail. The sound summoned Sherry immediately. She rushed into the kitchen, eyes going straight to her son. "Not me. Oh my God. Liam, what happened?" She knelt beside him, hugging him, as if he were the one who had been hurt. He looked mad," Liam stammered, sniffling. "I just wanted cocoa. I was making it for you," I said, softly, pressing a dish towel to my chest. The damp cloth was cold, which helped a little, but the burn still throbbed beneath the surface. Sherry didn't look at me. She focused entirely on Liam. "You scared him," she snapped. "Mom, you know how sensitive he is." I didn't raise my voice. I said. He pulled. He grabbed the mug. And, let's not do this. Daniel's voice came from the living room. I could hear the laptop keys clacking, and when I turned slightly, I saw him still seated on the couch, working. Come on, Mom. He's 6. Don't make a big deal out of nothing. Nothing, I echoed. I mean, he exhaled. Let's not ruin the rest of the day. Okay. That was the moment something broke, not loudly, but quietly, like a plate slipping from your hand and cracking just enough that you can't see the damage until it leaks later. I turned back to the sink and ran a paper towel under cool water. I pressed it carefully against my chest beneath my shirt. The skin felt tight and raw. I didn't dare look at it. I didn't want to know if it was red or blistered or worse. No one asked. Not Sherry, who was now holding Liam like a baby again, cooing and offering another cookie. Not Daniel, whose laptop was more interesting than the fact that his mother had just been burned. And Liam, he had stopped crying the moment he saw Sherry's face soften, as if it had all been rehearsed. Later that evening, after cleaning the kitchen and wiping up the last sticky traces of cocoa from the floor, I sat alone with a lukewarm cup of weak tea. I had steeped the bag too long, but didn't care. I peeled off my shirt carefully, wincing as the fabric tugged at the skin. A faint burn stretched from my collarbone to the bottom of my ribcage, angry red and uneven. It pulsed a painful reminder of something deeper than spilled cocoa. It reminded me of how invisible I had become even in pain. I opened the freezer and pulled out a bag of peas, the kind I kept for emergencies, pressed it gently against the burn, cold, sharp. I closed my eyes and listened to the house settle into evening, the flicker of the TV still playing holiday specials, Daniel's muffled voice on a Zoom call, Sherry laughing at something on her phone. No one knocked on my door. No one asked how I felt. Around 10:30, I heard the house go quiet. Lights dimmed, doors clicked shut. The hum of the fridge became the only sound. I got up, walked to the sink, and knelt down. I opened the bottom cabinet, the one where I kept spare trash bags and cleaning rags, pushed them aside, and reached into the back. There, where I had tucked it years ago, behind the plumbing, was a small plastic folder. Inside, I slid out a thin stack of papers, deed documents, signatures, crisp, notarized, a name printed in bold at the top, Eleanor Ruth Avery, property owner. I stared at those words, as if seeing them for the first time. My name, still mine, still legally bound to something solid, even if no one in this house remembered it. I folded the papers carefully and held them against my chest, just above the burn where it still ached. Outside, the rain had turned back into snow at 2:14 a.m. I sat at the kitchen table with a glass of lukewarm milk and a house deed I hadn't looked at in years. The kitchen was dark, except for the small bulb above the stove. I didn't bother with the overhead light. There was something about this hour that demanded quiet, demanded shadows. Outside, the street lamp cast a pale wash of orange across the hardwood floor. Snowflakes drifted in slow spirals beyond the window, barely clinging to the sill before vanishing. I ran my finger along the edge of the folder. Inside, the paper had gone soft at the corners, but the print remained sharp. Eleanor Ruth Avery, property owner. My name alone. I'd kept the deed tucked under the sink for decades, just in case something ever happened to Daniel, so I could act quickly. but I never imagined I'd pull it out because of something he did rather than something done to him. I took a sip of the milk, wrinkling my nose. It was slightly sour. I set it down. My hand slid over the familiar scrawl of my signature near the bottom of the page. I remembered signing it. I remembered sitting across from the notary in that cramped downtown office, still in my blouse from work, heart pounding in my chest as she stamped and sealed the document. The money had come from my father's estate, modest but enough. Daniel and Sherry were young parents back then, stretched thin. I'd just retired. They were going to stay for a year or two, help save for their own place. That was 14 years ago. I looked around the kitchen, the hand-painted teapot from my trip to Santa Fe, the ceramic backsplash I'd picked after months of collecting sample tiles, the built-in spice rack Daniel called overkill. The fridge still held the magnet with a photo of Liam from preschool, back when he called me Nana Ellie and snuggled against my cardigan sleeves. Everything in this house had my fingerprints on it, but not a single soul here saw it that way. I stood up, stretched my back, and wandered over to the back door. The lock clicked gently as I turned it and stepped out onto the tiny porch. The air was cold and crisp, smelling of wet pine and frozen soil. Across the way, porch light flickering like a blinking eye, stood Howard's house, No. 12. Just as I was about to head back inside, I noticed him on his stoop, holding a watering can in one hand. Couldn't sleep either, he called softly. I shook my head. Just thinking. He chuckled, rubbing his elbow. My arthritis says this. Weather's terrible for sleep, but the violets don't seem to mind. He gestured at the little flower boxes lining his railing. I could barely make out their shape in the dim light. You always take care of them, I said. And they don't talk back. He grinned. We stood quietly for a few seconds, the way only two insomniacs in their 60s can, comfortable in silence, even at an hour when the world pretended to sleep. Howard tilted his head. You all right, Eleanor? I considered lying, but the chill in the air and the weight of the papers in my hand made me honest. I'm thinking about going away for a few days. His expression didn't change, but he nodded slowly, as if he'd expected it. Well, he said after a moment, if you need someone to talk to, or a retired attorney who still remembers his bar number, I'm at number 12. I felt a small tug in my chest. You still remember that case with your pension. You helped me file the appeal, he said. I don't forget kindness. I smiled, but it didn't quite reach my eyes. Thank you, Howard. Back inside, I moved with care. I didn't turn on the lights. Just enough moonlight filtered through the blinds for me to find my way. In the hallway closet, I reached for the suitcase I'd once used for weekend trips. It still smelled faintly of lavender, dryer sheets. I opened it on the bed, letting the lid fall back with a soft sigh. Sweaters, I packed two. One was pale blue, the other oatmeal with frayed cuffs. I folded in my wedding photo. Not the one framed on the mantel, but the old one I kept in the back of my recipe book, where our smiles were still untested. I added my handwritten cookbook, the one with grease-stained pages and margin notes, like Daniel's favorite and Sherry hates onions. From the top drawer of my dresser, I took the small velvet pouch that held my father's pocket watch and the key to the fireproof box, just in case. I didn't know where I was going yet. Maybe a hotel by the river, maybe just out of town, somewhere with quiet. I walked back to the kitchen one last time. The milk had gone cold. I folded the deed carefully, placed it back in the folder, and tucked it into the side of the suitcase. Then I zipped the bag and stood still for a moment, listening. I nodded, went back inside, folded the papers, and began gathering the small things I would take with me. I didn't leave a note, just locked the front door, slipped the house deed into my coat pocket, and walked out. The morning air bit at my cheeks as I stepped off the porch. Snow coated the lawn in a soft, untouched layer so clean it felt wrong to disturb it. The sky was a dull winter gray, the kind that swallowed sound and made every movement feel heavier. I left the keys in an envelope, taped inside the mailbox. No drama, no announcement, just silence. Daniel once joked, "If you ever left, who'd make that roast chicken I love?" I doubt he remembered saying it, but now there'd be no roast. No one would notice the spices were off, or that the skin wasn't crisp enough. Just silence and leftovers from a plastic container. I opened the Uber app. A driver named Darren accepted ETA 6 minutes. While I waited, I walked next door and knocked gently on Mr. Howard's door. He opened it, wearing a fleece robe, blinking in surprise. "Eleanor, everything all right. I'm heading out for a few days," I said simply. "Would you mind printing something for me later? I need copies of property rights forms. Oregon law." He studied my face carefully, the way a man looks when he wants to ask a question, but respects the silence more. "Of course," he nodded. "Number 12's always open." The Uber pulled up just as I turned around. The driver rolled down the window and smiled. He was maybe in his early 30s, with a kind face and coffee in the cup holder. "You heading somewhere peaceful today, ma'am?" he asked. Adjusting the volume on the radio, Frank Sinatra was playing faintly. "I hope so," I said, sliding into the back seat. The roads were still slick with slush, but he drove carefully. We passed the familiar bend in the road, where the neighborhood Christmas lights always went up too early. This year, I hadn't noticed them at all. When we pulled up to Lorraine's guest house, it looked exactly the same as I remembered. A little red brick building, tucked between a laundromat, in a diner, with wind chimes dancing faintly in the cold air. I stepped out, paid, and thanked Darren. He smiled and tipped his cap, like we were in a black and white film. "Take care now." Lorraine opened the door before I knocked. She froze, wide-eyed. "Eleanor Avery." "Hi, Lorraine," I said, brushing snow from my shoulders. "My God." She stepped back, letting me in. "I still have that wool scarf you gave me last winter. The green one with the little white stitches. You said it reminded you of your grandmother." I smiled faintly. "I didn't think you'd remember." She waved a hand. "Please, I don't forget people who save my Christmas Eve with a lemon bundt cake when the bakery canceled my order." The lobby was warm and smelled like cinnamon and lemon cleaner. Lorraine led me to a small room upstairs. Room 3A, floral curtains, a modest bed, and a tiny kitchenette tucked into the corner. Everything looked like it had been scrubbed twice over. "You staying long?" "1 week," I said. "Maybe longer." Lorraine nodded, lips pressed gently together. "Whatever you need." When she left, I set my bag on the bed and looked around. The silence here was different. Not empty, just mine. I opened the closet. No clothes waiting to be folded, no jackets crammed to one side, just one wooden hanger and a shelf. I hung up my coat, then sat on the bed. The mattress creaked, not in protest, but like it was introducing itself. I ran my hand over the blanket, cotton, warm, neatly tucked. On the nightstand sat a small vase with one dried daisy. Inside Lorraine's touch. Later she knocked with a tray. 2 slices of toast with strawberry jam, and a cup of drip coffee. "No frills, no questions, breakfast," she said, placing it on the table. "You always said the toast matters more than the butter." I hadn't remembered saying that. but maybe I had. As she turned to leave, she paused. Eleanor, you're one of the kindest women I've ever met on this street. You've helped people quietly when no one was watching. It's your turn to be taken care of. Now, the words hit something soft in me. I nodded. She didn't wait for a response, just closed the door gently behind her. That night, I didn't turn on the TV. I just sat in the chair by the window, watching the snow settle under the street lamps. Then I opened my coat pocket and pulled out the deed. The paper made a soft whisper as I unfolded it. My name, my address, my signature. I ran my fingers along the creases, smoothed the edges, and I whispered more to myself than anyone. I still have something that belongs to me. Would you like to make this permanent? The notary asked, pen hovering. I nodded before she finished. The pen felt heavier than it should have, though. Maybe that was just the weight of everything behind it. The notary was a short, silver-haired woman named Janet, with thick glasses and a firm but kind expression. Her office smelled faintly of peppermint and old paper. A small space heater buzzed softly at her feet, warming the air with its metallic breath. I sat across from her in a straight-backed chair, my coat still buttoned. Rain tapped steadily against the window behind her desk. Outside, the sky was a wash of gray, the kind that settles into your bones. Lorraine sat nearby, flipping through a pamphlet about retirement planning without really reading it. She was just here for moral support. She hadn't said much, but I could feel her presence, like a hand resting lightly on my back. I looked down at the papers again. The transfer form, the declaration of intent, the notarized amendment. All of it, directing ownership of my home, to a nonprofit that helped displaced women over 60. The paperwork would only take effect after my passing. Until then, I could still technically walk back in. But in truth, I knew I never would. I signed with a steady hand. There we go, Janet said gently. That's everything. Lorraine squeezed my arm as I stood. We thanked the notary and stepped out into the mist. My shoes crunched softly on the damp sidewalk, the smell of wet asphalt thick in the air. Across the street was a little diner I hadn't been to in years. Millie's, a place where Daniel used to take me for pie on Mother's Day, back when Liam was still in diapers. And Sherry smiled. Without calculation, I walked in alone. The hostess, a girl who couldn't have been more than 20, offered a window booth. I slid into the vinyl seat and ordered the chicken pot pie and a coffee. Anything else? She asked. No, I said. That's enough. The jukebox in the corner crackled to life, with unchained melody. I hadn't heard it in years. Roy Orbison's voice filled the space with a gentle ache, like someone brushing dust off a photo frame. I used to dance to this song barefoot in the kitchen, long before Daniel could walk, before everything needed to be scheduled and practical and explained. The pie arrived, flaky, golden, filled with steaming chicken and vegetables. I cut into it slowly. I ate slowly. No one interrupted. No one asked what was for dinner tomorrow. No one needed me to clean up anything. When the bill came, I placed 3 $1 bills on the table. The same tip I'd always left, even when Daniel used to tease Mom. You're not Oprah. Why are you tipping like that? Because someone once taught me, kindness shouldn't depend on how much you think the other person makes. And besides, I'd never missed that extra dollar, but now I left it with a quiet sense of defiance. Not out of spite, out of principle. Lorraine met me at the door as I stepped back out. She studied my face for a long moment. Do you regret it? She asked softly. I looked up at the rain, streaking across the glass awning, at the way the world outside had blurred into watercolor. Only that I didn't do it sooner, I said. We stood there for a while, watching cars roll by. I could feel something unspooling inside me. Not pain, just release, like someone had wiped years of fingerprints off the glass of my memory. Back at the guest house, I kicked off my shoes and settled onto the bed. Letting my coat slide off my shoulders, I placed the final copy of the deed in the nightstand drawer. It was no longer a symbol of where I lived, but of what I'd chosen. I'd made the decision on my own terms, not as someone's mother, someone's cook, someone's forgotten backbone. My phone buzzed. The screen lit up with a message from Daniel, Mom. What is this? Are you serious? I stared at it for a few seconds, then gently turned the phone over, screen down on the nightstand. I didn't respond. The silence said enough. New Year's Eve, and for once, no one told me what to wear, what to cook, or when to smile. The stars were out in full scattering across the Oregon sky, like sequins on black velvet. The wind was gentle, almost ceremonial, as if the universe had agreed to hold its breath while the year turned its last page. Inside Lorraine's living room, the table had been pushed aside to make room for extra chairs. A soft hum of laughter and gentle conversation filled the space, floating around the scent of spiced cider and fresh-baked rolls. The local TV station played low in the background, counting down the final hours with grainy footage of fireworks in Portland. I'd brought a warm apple pie, still steaming, golden edges, crimped the way my grandmother used to do it. No one asked me to bake. I just wanted to. For the first time in years, cooking didn't feel like service. It felt like offering. Lorraine ushered me toward the dining table and pulled out the chair at the head. You're sitting here tonight, she said, smiling with no trace of insistence, just sincerity. I couldn't. I murmured, instinct tightening in my throat. She raised an eyebrow. You can, and you will. So I did. Iris and Mabel, 2 women from Lorraine's quilting circle, had come early and helped string lights along the bookshelf. Mr. Howard stopped by briefly with a bottle of root beer and a tin of peanut brittle. Didn't want to overstay, he said, tipping his hat, but figured a toast with friends never hurt. We clinked mugs and shared soft, tired smiles, the kind that come from surviving decades and still managing to show up with dessert. After dinner, we moved into the living room, each holding a small glass of apple wine. Someone turned down the lights and the TV flickered with images of people dancing in coats and scarves downtown. Mabel looked at me suddenly and asked, "Do you ever regret it?" I didn't hesitate, only that I lived so small for so long. Lorraine reached over and squeezed my hand. When the countdown reached 10, we joined in softly, not shouting, like in the years when children screeched and sparklers snapped in our hands, but with a rhythm that matched our years, steady. Intimate 3, 2, 1, Happy New Year. We chimed in, and Mabel leaned across to hug me. Her cheek was soft with age, warm with closeness. I raised my glass. The room quieted. Even the flicker of the television seemed to pause. Here's to women who left quietly and never came back the same. The others raised theirs in turn, murmuring soft affirmations. Later that night, when the last slice of pie had been eaten and the last laugh had faded into comfortable silence, I walked into the guest room Lorraine had prepared for me months ago. There was a new calendar on the wall, its first page crisp and bright. Beneath the photo of a sunlit meadow in cursive script were the words, "You are your own home." I smiled, fingers brushing the corner of the page. I sat at the vanity and pulled out my phone. The screen reflected my face, lines deepening silver streaks in my hair and eyes. I finally recognized as mine. Without overthinking, I lifted the phone and took a photo, my first real selfie. No filter, just me. Then I typed the caption slowly, letting the words come, like breath, starting over at 67. This time for me. The night was quiet, and for the first time in years, so was my heart. I had once believed that love meant always giving, always staying, until I learned that when you forget to value yourself, even the people you've given everything to can learn to forget you too. Kindness is a gift, yes, but dignity is a boundary. Like an old quilt that once kept everyone warm, we must remember it deserves a place even when the room no longer feels cold. If this story stirred something in you, perhaps tonight is the right time to reach for your own warmth and protect it gently but firmly.